Hello friends, welcome back to the Jamie Bolam podcast. My guest today is my good friend and classmate, Katie Lawton. Katie and I have recently started our Masters in Biodiversity, Conservation and Management, aka BCM, at the University of Oxford. Everyone on our course is absolutely inspirational and passionate about conservation, and Katie is no exception, having started an advocacy and fundraising initiative for rhino conservation in her home state of Texas, where she also worked in the conservation sector of the Dallas Zoo. Yeehaw! Katie's also worked in the Eastern Cape of South Africa on landscape connection and restoration initiatives as an assistant to a wildlife vet and conservationist, doing all the cool conservation work you see on TV, and helping conserve iconic wildlife including lions, zebra, and our beloved rhinos. Beyond conservation, Katie enjoys hiking, writing, music, and travel. Today, we're talking all about the world of rhino conservation. Listen on to hear Katie's story and conservation journey, the multifaceted nature of rhino conservation, from the rhinos themselves through to anti-poaching efforts and poaching syndicates, corruption, and reducing demand for rhino horn from the consumer side. Expect to learn the vital importance of advocacy, how reducing air pollution in Asia could help save rhinos, and our thoughts on the very hot topic of trophy hunting and conservation, the controversies surrounding it, reasons to support it, and why it's not as clear-cut of an issue as you might expect. If you enjoy this episode, please follow me on your favourite streaming platforms for more. So you don't miss out on anything due to algorithm madness, I have made a free email newsletter that you can sign up to at jamiebolam.substack.com. I hate spam and much prefer speaking to writing, so as of now, the only intentions I have with the newsletter is to alert you guys to when an exciting new episode has been released and who is slated to come on the podcast in the future. I might add some other bits, like what music I've been listening to lately, but I'm taking this one step at a time and I'm a busy guy, so there won't be anything too crazy on there just yet. You can also follow me on Instagram at jamie.a.bolam. Like the newsletter, I will just use this page to share updates on the podcast, but I might also share some calisthenics, some Latin dancing, basically anything that looks super cool, treating it like a public PR page for myself. So I would love it if you would give me a cheeky follow on there as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, without further ado, Katie Lawton. Okay, welcome back to the Jamie Bolam podcast. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Katie Lawton. I'm a student here at Oxford with Jamie. I'm studying for a master's in biodiversity, conservation, and management. I did my undergrad at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, USA, and my major was environmental science with a minor in biology and a certificate in wildlife management.
Ooh.
Quite a mouthful.
Sick, nice.
After that, I went to South Africa, where I had an internship studying landscape restoration and sort of rhino conservation, wildlife conservation, range expansion, veterinary science, all kinds of random skills I learned there. So, but I also, during my undergrad, did a lot of just rhino conservation advocacy. So that's where a lot of my background knowledge comes from on that. Yeah.
Nice, sick, cool. Could you tell us some more about your rhino conservation experience?
Yeah, so I've always loved all animals. I wouldn't say that rhinos have ever been my number one favorite since I was a kid, nothing cool like that. But I did start getting into elephant poaching when I was in like middle school, high school. I started hearing about it and got really fascinated with the whole how complex the issue was and how it wasn't just as simple as don't kill elephants. So I think that was sort of my entry into the field of endangered species conservation for one, and also wildlife trade, poaching, conservation in that realm. So when I was in college, during my undergrad, I went on a study abroad trip to South Africa for 3 weeks over the summer that my school had, and that was amazing. We went to Johannesburg, Cape Town, and then to a game reserve in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And there is where we spent most of our time. We went on safaris, and we learned from a wildlife vet and conservationist named Dr. William Folds, who I highly recommend as a follow if you aren't already.
Okay. It's on Instagram or something.
He's on Instagram.
Oh,
Yeah,
sick.
I
Awesome.
think it's just William Folds. But yeah, he's a great guy, does a lot of really good work out there, so very knowledgeable. And so that's who we were learning from about rhino poaching. He, as a wildlife vet, has been called to a lot of crime scenes of poachings of rhino, so he has seen firsthand sort of the really dark side of the trade. So that was like obviously heart-wrenching to like see. He showed us videos of rhinos that had been poached and their horns were sawed off and their faces were bleeding and just like left there to die. Very, very sad stuff. So my whole class, when we came back to the US, we decided to form a student organization around it. There was already an organization at TCU, my school, called the Rhino Initiative, but there wasn't really any way for students to get involved. It was mostly just a fundraising campaign that one of our professors had put on, Dr. Michael Slattery, who I don't know if he's on Instagram, but highly recommend a professional follow.
Okay, absolutely.
He's also a great figure in the rhino conservation world from Texas. He's from South Africa, but now he's working from Texas. So yeah, I worked with him. We made a student organization, had students get involved with rhino conservation. Most people, we had a rhino skull, a fake rhino skull, that we would sort of put out and table and try and raise awareness. People would come up and be like, "Oh, cool, a triceratops." Like, no, this is a rhino.
A real triceratops.
Yeah, we had some people be like, "Oh, the rhinos are extinct, aren't they?"
What, really?
Really? Yeah.
No way.
That's why advocacy is very important.
Damn.
Or there was also an interesting wave of when the northern white rhinos, there's only 2 left now, and so when the last male died, I had a lot of people reach out to me on Instagram and say, "I'm so sorry, the rhinos are extinct now. I hope you still find something to do with the Rhino Initiative."
No way, really?
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
So people, I think that just kind of goes to show how important awareness is in conservation.
That's very true.
Because people really do care. They just don't really, nobody has the time to go read up on these things.
I guess because this is what we do. So we're like, how do you not know about this? But
exactly.
it can be, that's very true.
Yeah. So it's very easy to ignore too, and you don't think that there's anything you can do to help. So that's kind of what we wanted to do, is let people know that even from Texas, you can still make a difference. You can tell people you know about this, raise awareness, donate to this on-the-ground cause where they're actually making really good progress. So that's what I was doing there. Loved leading that initiative. When I graduated, I went to South Africa, as I said, and went back to the game reserve I had visited before, worked for Dr. Folds, and learned a lot there. So we were doing procedures on rhinos. Most of it was just routine ecology procedures. We were attaching GPS radio collars onto them. They attach them onto their ankles. So
it's like a prison.
It is, yeah. It's actually exactly like a parole bracelet.
Yeah.
And that was where a lot of the money that we raised went to. And so those are really important for the anti-poaching team to be able to track the rhinos and know where they are, keep tabs on them, because anti-poaching is such a huge part of rhino conservation. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we were doing that, and then also working on a landscape restoration initiative, as I said. So kind of taking down fences in the area, giving these rhinos more land to roam, essentially. Not just rhinos, obviously, but they were a great champion species.
Yeah, it's a good flagship. Oh, okay, that's a good term. We can get the audience to or enlighten them. What's a flagship species?
So a flagship species is sort of the face of a conservation movement. If you put a beetle on a conservation campaign ad, try and get kids to care about it, people to care about it, they're going to say, "I squish beetles in my house all the time." So I'm not necessarily going to donate to them being conserved. If you put a rhino or a tiger, these really iconic species.
Or like WWF panda.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. There's a reason for all of that. It's not just because those are the only species we care about, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's because when you donate to those species and you help those species, you're almost always helping out other species in the process.
Yeah.
So there obviously are campaigns for insects and for birds and a lot of the less charismatic species, but getting people to care about the big ones is kind of step one, I think, to getting them into nature conservation. And then once they're into it, you can kind of go into the complexities of ecosystems and why the whole system is important and the whole biosphere, and we all rely on each other. Even the insects are important. So all of that is very needed, but the flagship species I think are a great way to start. And rhinos are a good one. They're like a living dinosaur. Everybody loves them.
They're so cool. I think also it ties in nicely to the concept of umbrella species. So would you like to explain what an umbrella species is?
I think you should explain what an umbrella species
is.
Yeah,
cool. So that's basically they're often the large sexy megafauna, like the big animals that we see, and an umbrella species. Imagine if you put an umbrella up when it's raining, you're not just shading you or protecting you from the rain, you can protect a few other people as well. So the idea is that if you're protecting one of these large animals that has very large habitat requirements, you know, they have large ranges, they need like specialist conditions, or, you know, mainly just the large habitat ranges, I think, you know, or if it's a top predator, you need to have all of your herbivores, and you need to have all of the other different components lower down the food chain in order to have the large carnivore, or in order to have like a rhino, you know, which is at the, you know, doesn't really get eaten, so they're at the top of their food chains, I suppose. And yeah, by protecting them, you're protecting everything else by virtue of them being, you know, the top, the big dogs in the ecosystem, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, they often go hand in hand with flagship species, I find. So,
yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, no, cool. Nice. So what shocked you the most about like rhino conservation when you got into South Africa and stuff? Was there anything that you were like surprised at?
That's a great question.
Were there any misconceptions that you had, do you think?
I think a big misconception is, I'll have to think about that. I was going to say that there's like a war going on, you know. There is a war going on with rhino horn, so like a lot of people think it's just like you stop the trade, you know, that's pretty much it, but on the ground stopping the poaching is a really, really big thing. So on the game reserve I was at, they spend I think 50% of their budget on anti-poaching.
Oh wow.
Which for a large game reserve, they have all kinds of animals there. Tourism is lodging, all of that, accommodation, ecology, maintenance. They have a lot of expenses. Anti-poaching being 50% is major, and so that's why they need so much fundraising. That was quite a shock to me. Just goes to show how intense these poachers can be.
Yeah.
And this was in the Eastern Cape, where there's not as much poaching, nearly as much as there is in like the northeast of the country, like in Kruger National Park, for example. It's where probably 80 or 90% of the poaching is.
Oh, really?
In the Eastern Cape, I think it's like, I don't remember the statistic. I think it's maybe less than 5%, if that. So, which is a great problem to have, but it was still very intense, the poaching there, or the risk of poaching. The reserve I was at hadn't had a poaching incident for the past 11 years, I believe.
Oh, perfect.
So, so...
they're doing a good job.
Right, exactly. But that doesn't mean that they need to stop the anti-poaching, you know, that just means that it's working.
Yeah.
So, I think it probably is tempting when it's that much of their budget, especially during hard times like COVID, where the ecotourism industry was really hit hard, and they were no exception to that. So that is one disadvantage to relying on ecotourism is just the instability. They were saying that they had a similar thing in 9/11 in 2001. Really? Yeah. Oh, wow. People weren't flying, you know, a lot of their clientele is American. So people weren't flying, and then again in 2008 with the recession. Yeah. So I think and South Africa is not the only country that's hit by those or other geopolitical issues that come up.
Yeah. That's interesting. We'll go into more about funding conservation models later on.
Sure.
I guess, would you like to give us an overview of like why rhinos get poached and like the whole rhino horn thing? Because I think people have a general idea, but like it would be interesting to hear from someone who knows a bit more.
I would love to.
Go ahead.
This is something I can talk about forever. So
go for it.
We've picked a good topic.
Perfect.
So the rhino horn trade is very multifaceted, which is part of the reason I'm very fascinated with it, and also part of the reason why it's so difficult to solve. True wicked problem. Just means that there's a lot of different things interacting with each other. Makes it almost impossible to crack the entire puzzle. So there's, I would say, 5 main categories. So one is just rhino management. That's the closest you can get to the rhino. Actual breeding, ecology, managing the number of rhinos you have on a reserve, that sort of thing. That does take some funding, but it's generally more well understood area of rhino conservation. Another big one is anti-poaching. It's probably the next closest to the rhinos, keeping them from actually getting poached. So that can come in the form of the GPS collars, like I was saying, just being able to track the rhinos, having boots on the ground is what they call it, just like people tracking the rhinos, keeping tabs on them at all times. There's no reserve with no anti-poaching. Yeah. There's no national park with no anti-poaching. If you have rhinos, you have to have some form of protection for them. Sometimes some reserves have that in the form of dehorning their rhinos. I was able to take part in a few dehorning procedures when I was there. And it's honestly very emotional. Yeah. Everybody there, nobody really takes it lightly. You know, it's this super old. I mean, it's like I said, it's a living dinosaur. Yeah. Ancient species, and they have this iconic horn. That's what everybody knows them for. Yeah. And then just to see it sort of get sawed off. Obviously, the rhino's tranquilized. It's a very safe procedure. Yeah. It's the rhino horn is made of keratin, so it's like. It's the same stuff as your fingernails. Yeah. So when you dehorn them, it's like cutting your fingernails. Doesn't really hurt them, but obviously you need a chainsaw to cut those off. It's not just like a nail clipper. So it is. I mean, it could be traumatic for them, but they are tranquilized. So hopefully they don't remember it. But yeah, it's very sad to see, and nobody really enjoys it. But it's just sort of an attempt to keep. To let poachers know that reserve doesn't, their rhino don't have horns, and so the idea is that if all their rhinos are dehorned, the poachers will know that, and that they won't come in their reserve in the first place. Yeah,
does it work?
That is a hot topic. Yeah, and it's hard to say. I think it can work, and sometimes it doesn't. So traditional anti-poaching strategies also sometimes work and sometimes don't. So. I don't know if there is a right answer of which one's better, but with dehorning, there still is a chance that a poacher will track down a rhino because they do it all by foot. Yeah. So they go at night, they track down the rhino, and they get up to it and realize that it's dehorned. Sometimes they will kill it anyways, just so that they don't track it again another time. Yeah. Sometimes they'll kill it anyways and get the little bit of horn that's left. Yeah. The nail plate actually ends a couple inches below the skin. Oh, wow. And so that's why you see sawing rhinos' faces off to get that last bit of horn. Oh, okay. Very sad because there is a humane way to take off their horn just by sawing it off above the surface, a few inches above the surface, but it's so valuable that they're willing to saw off the entire face and kill the animal, leave it there bleeding to die, just for those last few grams of it. Very sad. So that's the cases where dehorning doesn't necessarily work if somebody is desperate enough, that they'll go for that last little bit. Same with the babies too. I hate talking about that, but the babies have a tiny little stump of a horn, and they'll take that too. Yeah, they also sometimes will I think kill the babies because they can be loud, and so it's easier. It's so sad. Yeah. Moving on. I don't want to talk about baby rhinos. Anyways, so anti-poaching is a huge expense, and just veterinary bills to begin with. I learned working with a vet. You know, it's a whole operation. So those two I think are probably closest to the rhinos. You have the actual. I think community empowerment, community engagement is a really big one. So that's with communities in Africa, the people around the rhinos. That is super underestimated how important that is, in my opinion. And there is a lot of work being done for it, which is great. So it's basically engaging the community with the rhinos, letting them know how important these animals are, their history, why we should care about the rhinos. South Africa is an interesting example because of its socioeconomic situation. So obviously we're in post-apartheid South Africa now, and so that was not very long ago. It was in the 90s. Yeah, crazy. So still recovering socioeconomic situation there. Not to say it hasn't improved, it absolutely has, but there are obviously still remnants of that. So most landowners are going to be white. Yeah. Most people that work the land are going to be black. Yeah. And that just systemically, I think, has a bit of a there's been a bit of a shift over decades, probably, of it's the white man's rhino. Yeah. We're not connected to that animal anymore. Don't really feel any sort of heritage or connection with it like a lot of people do with their wildlife. Yeah. So if they're seeing it as a way to put food on the table, you know, I'll go and kill this animal I've never seen before. You have to pay all this money to go see it. I can't afford to go and see these animals. It's not something like a lion that's walking into their yard. It's something far away. It's something fenced. At least where I was, that's my experience. I know that that's not the case everywhere in Africa or in South Africa.
Absolutely,
At least where I was, that's what I was told. So these people just don't really have a connection to their animals, and for that reason it's a lot easier to just go and kill one to keep your family alive. That's an easy choice for those people, and you can't put that,
you can't
hold that against them, right? That's a tough thing, because you want to see these poachers as horrible people, but then at the same time, I think a lot of people in the same situation would have acted the same. So it's more of a systemic issue, and why it's so hard to solve. But if you reach, especially kids, is a huge outreach program. Reaching kids, getting them out in nature, taking them on safaris, having them see these animals, form a connection with them when they're young, like so many people around the world do. You watch cartoons and have stuffed animals, and you form a connection with rhinos from afar, you know? So trying to get those kids to do the same up close and personal with the animals really makes a difference, so that they'll grow up to respect wildlife, respect the environment, live in harmony with it, and value it enough to find other means of income. That said, the country does have a long way to go in terms of just the poverty and the people there, you know. That is another big issue that hopefully is going in the right direction, but I'm not really sure. The judicial situation there is also very bad, so the corruption. So even when they catch poachers, it's actually interesting. In the Eastern Cape where I just was, they caught a group of poachers. They went to court, and then they were sentenced, and then they escaped from jail. And everybody was outraged, like, how do these prisoners just walk out of jail after being sentenced? So things like that, delayed court cases and hearings, and people just posting bail and being able to go back out, keep poaching. It's all intertwined, as you can kind of see.
Absolutely.
And it's not even really just the individual poachers either. Like, you want them to be sentenced, of course, but then also, if you take one guy out of it, somebody else, there's a long line of people.
Syndicates, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's more of like a drug syndicate than anything else. So a lot of people don't realize that about it either. These poaching syndicates are huge, very complex networks of people, much like a drug syndicate. Of there's usually a couple kingpins involved, and they have networks of smugglers, and then the very last fingertips of the network are the poachers. They're just people at, like, you know, their last option, pretty much. So you're always going to be able to find people desperate of income, and rhino horn is so valuable that anybody will take that risk for that money. Not anybody, but a lot of people will. So you can't put that past them. There is a great short film. Hang on. I have to find it. I would recommend it to anybody. It's very short. Two Sides of a Horn.
Two Sides of a Horn.
Yes.
Okay.
I would highly recommend it. I think it's on YouTube, or you should be able to find it online.
Okay.
But it kind of shows both sides, like the name suggests, of the trade. So
I think that's important. Like, it reminds me of this project. I think I found it on Instagram. It's called Project Hiu. So Project and HIU. I think it's a similar thing, but focusing on shark fin trades. So there was this lady who went out into, I just know the rough details of it, but she basically thought, all the people who are finning these sharks are, the bad people, they're just like rotten to the core, like nasty guys, whatever. And she went to this place. I think it's a hotbed of shark finning in Indonesia. And hiu is, like, I think the Indonesian word for shark. Somebody look it up. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure. And what she found was, they're just like super lovely people. They just have no other way of making ends meet. So it's like what you say, it's just community conservation and poverty alleviation, are so important. And I think one thing, I think that's probably the reason most people chose our degree, but most other conservation degrees I saw would just be just biology, you know, and I'm a biologist, so I find it interesting, but most of the conservation the drivers of the problems and the solutions are all to do with people. So if you're not clued up about, you know, community empowerment or law or economics or, you know, helping people get out of poverty, like you're putting putting a band-aid on a bullet hole.
Yes,
right,
exactly.
So it's all intertwined. It's not just about studying the rhinos,
right?
Obviously that's what we, you know, want to do,
right?
But there's a whole a whole other like part to it.
Right. To be able to help the rhinos, you also need to be able to help the people.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You know, I think so much of conservation, I think a lot of it is around the flagship species. Like you donate to the picture of the rhino, but what you're really donating to is helping them live in harmony with people. Yeah. Because people have kind of gotten them in this situation to begin with. So you're not just handing money to the rhino. You know, you're handing money to these causes that are helping the people conserve the rhino. Which is really important, and I think something that's being done more and more, which is really hopeful, at least in my perspective. I've seen a lot more of it, and that's very encouraging. Yeah. So I think I'm at 3 now.
Yeah, you're
5.
at 3. Yeah.
So we've done rhino ecology management. Yeah. We did community engagement and anti-poaching. Yeah. So the other one is. I can't think of 5. There's the.
So we got to the kingpins. Yeah. And the syndicates. So I guess they've got their rhino horn. Yeah. You know, and then where's it gonna go?
The trade.
The trade
is
How does the trade work?
So the law enforcement, I think. Yeah. Would be number 4. So I touched on the law enforcement a bit. Yeah. But the corruption is the main key there. So I talked about the corruption a bit in the court system. It also exists in the trade networks. Yeah. Quite a lot. So policy, obviously, like CITES, you know.
Yeah, what's CITES?
The Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna.
How does it work? How does it work?
So CITES is basically the international body where all the parties meet, parties being countries, NGOs, other interested, basically, bodies. They all show up, have a big meeting, and they talk about how the trade of wildlife, live animals and animal parts should be governed internationally. This also can be, I guess, followed with regional laws, but CITES is pretty much the international body of basically agreeing upon, okay, this animal's endangered, how are we going to go about conserving it in the trade realm? Yeah. So rhinos are on Appendix 1 of CITES, I believe.
What does that mean?
That means that their trade is banned internationally with certain exceptions. So the exceptions right now, I believe, are for trophy hunting, which is another hot topic.
Yeah, we'll get into that a bit later.
Yeah, so I believe that's the only...
Is it also transfer of live animals, like between zoos and conservation stuff?
Yes.
I think that comes under CITES, right?
Right, I think it does. That's another one of the exceptions. But other than that, like, very much banned. And so obviously rhino horn trade is still a very big thing, which means it's all underground. It's all an illegal black market trade, which goes back to these syndicates. It really is this whole dark, dodgy underground thing. Yeah. But not all of it is super underground. I think a lot of it is just being able to pay the right people and have middlemen along the way. Yeah. And it is so difficult to infiltrate because of how secretive they are. They had a lot of corruption in Kruger National Park.
Oh, really?
A couple years ago, it came out that they had a whole surveillance operation of some kind where a lot of rangers at Kruger were being paid off to tip off poachers about the locations of rhinos.
Oh, no.
So you just never really know who these people are, and you know, there's a price for everyone. Yeah. So and they are making so much money that usually they can pay that price. Yeah. So rhino horn is the most valuable substance in the world.
Oh, really? How much is it worth?
I believe I don't know if I'd be able to give an accurate price.
Can you give a ballpark?
I think it was like $150,000 or something.
For what? How much?
for a kilogram.
Wow.
Let me look it up.
That's crazy. That reminds me, while you look that up, of this organisation, National Park Rescue, headed by Dr. Niall McCann. I believe when I met him last week at the Royal Geographic Society's Exploration Conference, he was saying they're basically, they help national parks that are failing, but their main thing is the law enforcement side, and like having boots on the ground and making sure these people have a livelihood. And basically they have this scheme where the rangers get tokens and they kind of cash them in for, for example, food, etc., instead of their regular pay. But they can also, if they decide to cash them in for like children's education, things like that, the value of the token is doubled. So because a lot of these, these guys, these men and women, they just want to help put their kids through school, and make sure there's food on the table and stuff. So it's helping them make the right choices instead of having to resort to, getting involved in the rhino poaching industry to, help their families. So it's things like that where you're just helping people.
That sounds like
make
a
the right
great
system. I think that was roughly, from what I remember, that was roughly how the token system worked. But it seemed like a really cool idea, and they said it's worked like miraculously.
Where was this?
I think the organisation is called National Park Rescue.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where.
Okay.
Where they work. Somewhere in Southern Africa, I think.
That's very cool.
It was really cool.
Like a good system.
Yeah.
People are coming up with all kinds of creative solutions. Which is very important.
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, I just looked it up. I was using a figure from 2013, which is probably no longer accurate, but now this website says 400,000 per kilogram for Asian rhino horn, 20,000 per kilogram for African rhino horn. That's US dollars. So
crazy.
Somewhere in there. So I guess the price of it has gone down, which is interesting. I'll have to look into the reasons behind that, or where they got that figure. So maybe take that with a grain of salt. But that was a 2022 figure from a reputable source. So
also, I guess it depends. Like, I don't know how it works on the consumer side. If they know which species it is, for example, if it was like a black rhino, it might be more valuable. I'm not sure. Would you want to give like a quick overview of the different rhino?
Sure.
Like population, like how many white rhinos are there? How many black rhinos?
White rhinos, southern white rhinos, I should say. Northern white rhinos, there's two.
There's two.
That's the population. Southern white rhinos, there's also a lot of contention around that number for whatever reason. You would think they would have a better idea, but
sometimes they don't know.
A few years ago, I saw a number that was like 10 to 12,000, and now I think it's more like 15 to 18,000. And I'm not sure if that's due to the population going up. I don't think that's it. I think it's just due to a monitoring issue.
Okay, fair
and
enough.
Reporting issue of we don't really know how many rhinos there are. So I think it's somewhere between 16 to 18,000 white rhinos. And black rhinos, I believe it's between 5 and 7,000.
I think so. Yeah.
Something like that. Black rhinos are much more. They're more isolated.
They're solitary for the most part as well. Whereas white rhinos are herd animals, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there tend to be more white rhinos just in a general population. Because black rhinos are very territorial. So being solitary, they usually need fewer of them per ecosystem. So that's kind of where those numbers come down. But there are both. I think black rhinos may be under critically endangered status. And I'm not sure if white rhinos are critically endangered or endangered technically, but both of them are in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that status doesn't always carry a whole lot of scientific backing.
And then even at like a large population scale, something might be like not as endangered. Like you have to break it down into the different subspecies or the different regions. Like, because one area might be super isolated and have like a few rhino left. Whereas another population might have an absolute ton, and they're not as much in trouble. I can't remember. Do you know the population size of like greater one-horn rhinos, like the Indian rhino?
The Indian rhino, I think, is like 1,500.
1,500,
I say somewhere around there. And then Sumatran and Javan rhinos, there's less than 100 of each in Indonesia.
They're one of my pet topics.
Javan
rhinos, there's like I think maybe between 60 and 70. And they're all in this one national park in Indonesia on Java called Ujung Kulon National Park. So it's all good that they're all together because it means they can all breed you know, so that population's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they need to expand. They basically need to expand their habitat because otherwise they're just at carrying capacity.
Yeah.
So they can't have many more rhinos. So they need to They need to move some rhinos to another national park. And the main worry is like if something like a tsunami hit, like the Boxing Day tsunami or something, that demolished like, you know, all of that area. If something like that were to happen, and it hit Ujong Kulon National Park, like the Javan rhino is just screwed.
Yeah.
And they're called Javan rhinos, but they did used to range all the way through like Indochina, through Vietnam and Laos, you know, down into Java. Now there's 60 left. And the other one, the Sumatran rhino, is in an even worse shape. And they're very unique. They're the closest living relative of the woolly rhino. They're really teeny. They're like, I've heard they're like Shetland pony size.
They're so small.
And there's, I don't know, maybe like 35 left, but they're very fragmented. And the problem is when they don't see another rhino for a while, the females, their ovaries stop working. So then if they basically go enough time without, you know, seeing a handsome male rhino, they just can't have babies anymore.
Wow, I didn't know.
I know, and it's so that's the real trouble. But when their habitats are so fragmented, and each forest might only have a few rhinos, you know, there's like supposed to be 3 national parks where the Sumatran rhino still lives in the wild, and I think one of them, the last survey found 0 evidence of rhinos. The other one probably had a few, and then the last stronghold is Lusa, is a Lusa rainforest in northern Sumatra, which is the last place that has rhinos, elephants, orangutans, and tigers, all in the same place. So that's like the last like wild population that could have like any hope. And then the last ditch effort is to bring them all together into a national park breeding centre. I can't remember exactly where. I think Waikambas National Park. But basically the last ditch effort is to bring them all together into a breeding centre. And they had a baby this year, which was really cute. But it's a last ditch effort. And there's like they found another Sumatran rhino on Borneo, I think last year or a couple of years ago. But even just within Indonesia, within the same country, the Bornean government is like, oh, you know, this is the pride of Borneo, we're not gonna send it over to Sumatra. And I'm like, you idiot, like it's just gonna die alone, like please, like just send it over to the breeding centre, you know, because there was an effort to have a breeding program in the 90s, but it just fell apart because at that point Malaysia had rhinos as well as Indonesia, and I think maybe another country did, but basically Malaysia and Indonesia, neither of them was like, okay, we'll give you our rhinos. They were like, no, we want to keep our rhinos in our country, and it's just fell apart, and it's really sad to see like geopolitics get in the way of saving rhinos.
Hence why international collaboration, as we've been learning, is so integral to conserving species.
Anyway, that's my spiel about Sumatran rhinos. Are so underrated. Nobody knows about them. They're so cute.
I have to say I don't know as much about them,
They're
so I'm glad you give a spiel.
Oh, let me turn my emails off. Anyways, so that was my spiel on rhinos.
And I do think that that's a good point because poaching is the biggest like hot button issue in rhino conservation. Like stop the poaching, but habitat loss and fragmentation is another huge threat to rhinos and to a lot of African species. Rhinos being one of the flagships for them. So I mean the Sumatran and Javan rhinos, obviously with so little land area left, you know, their biggest issue is that they need more space. They're at carrying capacity right now. And for other rhinos, it's the same for a lot of African rhinos as well. So there's something called the Black Rhino Expansion Program in South Africa that is also a very cool project worth looking into. And that's sort of trying to combat that issue of not only are we trying to stop poaching, but we're trying to just have more space to put these black rhinos, because you don't want to increase the population without increasing the amount of land that they're on, because you're going to put the ecosystem out of equilibrium. So doing this all in a smart way, and a science-informed way, social and science-informed way, all equally important. Okay, so I think we're at number 4. So we talked about international trade a bit. And we were at the price of rhino horn. So obviously the rhino horn trade is super lucrative. So overall it can be apparently from $20,000 US for an African horn to $400,000 for a Asian rhino horn. I think that's mostly just a rarity thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure that number varies a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
And I'm really interested now to look into why the price has changed so much. But either way, still very lucrative. It used to be, when it was over $100,000 per kilogram, more than worth its weight in gold, which is why it was the most sought after substance in the world, pretty much, which is bizarre because, like I said earlier, it's keratin.
Yeah.
Same stuff as your fingernails.
Yeah.
You don't see anybody selling their toenails for $20,000 a kilogram.
Well, I mean, have you been on OnlyFans? I don't know.
Oh gosh, a toenail OnlyFans. That's an image.
Yeah.
Wow. Now I'm off. My brain is off topic. Toenails.
Number 5, presumably it will be the consumers.
The consumer, yeah. So
who is buying this rhino?
Who is buying the rhino horn? Why are they fueling this horrible problem? So that's another answer is people. You know, people are at every step of the way, as you can see here. Very important. But the people at the end of the trade are generally China and Vietnam. Those are the countries that import the most rhino horn and have the most consumers. That's not to say other countries also don't import it. The U.S. is a big importer in Laos and Philippines and all kinds of other places. But
is the U.S. an importer for Chinese traditional medicine?
No, it's mostly for trophies.
Okay, yeah.
But for the traditional Chinese medicine is mostly to China and Vietnam. I think Vietnam is mostly Vietnam, but also a lot in China.
Yeah.
So traditionally in Chinese medicine, it was used for a wide variety of cures. So there's a rumor that it's a cure for cancer. There's a rumor that it's an aphrodisiac, sort of like a nature's Viagra sort of thing.
I mean, that's one big horn, so maybe
it
transfers over.
One big horn. It's like a powerful thing. Yeah. It's also, since it is so expensive to buy, it's a status symbol and sort of a respect thing. Yeah. So if you know somebody's sick and you give them ground rhino horn, they add water to it and they drink it, and it's supposed to be some sort of like a miraculous cure. And honestly, like if you have a family member that's dying of cancer and you're going to spend every last penny you have on any solution that may or may not work, whether or not it's backed by science. So again, you cannot blame the people for, first of all, believing in a centuries-old cultural tradition that they have of traditional Chinese medicine. You can't just invalidate that by science. You can't. That's a cultural belief, you know. You also can't invalidate people wanting to use try a medicine to heal somebody that they love and care for. So speaking of, though, it is not backed by science. They've done all sorts of studies on keratin being a cure for cancer, rhino horn being a cure for cancer, and it's just not. There's no conclusive evidence either way that it helps or doesn't help. Which I don't know if that's really helped the trade very much. I think it's still obviously still a very big issue whether or not people are going to believe in the science of it. You see people not believing in science every day. So
that's fair.
when it's something that high stakes. There's also a very interesting point that came from a documentary called Stroop, which I also highly recommend.
How do you spell that?
Stroop.
Okay.
It's the Afrikaans word for poach. And there's a amazing documentary where you can hear somebody talk about all of this again. But just every different facet of the rhino horn trade. And it's this South African reporter and another filmmaker. And I got to meet them actually. They came to my school. Did a screening, and they're very great people. Susan Scott and Bonnet I forget her last name.
Okay.
But
something Afrikaans.
Yes. But yeah, they made a great film. Goes into all the details about this. They have people going into the markets in Asia, and I should say it's also not just like sold in a supermarket or anything like that. It is still very black market there. So you have to go through all these different layers of security before you can even see the contraband, you know. So they had a very undercover operation, and they've had a few like that trying to bust the illegal wildlife markets.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy thing to do, nor is it going to stop the problem, honestly.
Yeah.
So part of the problem is the demand.
Mm.
So a lot of the solutions going into that are just sort of advocacy.
Yeah.
So Yao Ming had a campaign a long time ago where he was trying to
the
stop
basketballer, right?
Yes, yeah. Super tall guy.
Yeah.
Where he was campaigning to stop using rhino horn and things like
nice,
that have a lot of impact. You know, people listen to
yeah.
celebrities,
They do.
especially like ones from their country.
Yeah.
So a lot of the call for rhino conservation is coming from the West and from Africa, and those voices don't necessarily reach those markets. The people in China and Vietnam, a lot of those people, you can imagine, don't know that when they're buying a rhino horn, they are necessarily buying a poached rhino. Every once in a while, a horn from a stockpile or something can get through, but for the most part, rhino horn that's bought is poached. It's blood horn. So people don't really see that, and so a lot of the campaign was to try and bring those really emotive, horrible images of the poached rhinos to Asia and kind of show people like, this is the other side of what you're buying. And it's made a lot of people think twice. I think a lot of it is also reaching the young generation of Chinese and Vietnamese youth who are saying, I will never buy rhino horn. I've told my family never to buy rhino horn. And I think there is sort of a generational shift there happening, which is very hopeful for the future, because those people will grow up to live in households where they don't buy rhino horn. And hopefully the tradition will phase out over time as something that we used to do. But obviously that's easier said than done, and a little bit difficult to predict whether or not it will actually happen. So all we can really do is keep trying there. Every person you reach is helping. So obviously the price has gone down, so hopefully that's indicative of some of that.
That's very true. No, that's really interesting. I guess it's just mind-boggling when like things like this, like rhino horns, it's not validated by science, or there's no evidence they work.
It's like, stop buying it.
Like you can just hope that one day, because like you know, ultimately, like a lot of our medicines are based from nature, you know. And like herbal medicines, you know, like herbs do have medicinal properties. Like most of our, you know, like, I don't know, let me give a good example. Like, is it quinine? It is derived from willow bark, which is and that's like the basis of anti-malarial medicines, etc. But when something, so it can be easy to believe like, oh, if these things work, then other things might. But there is a whole bunch of junk. Along with the things that do actually work.
Right. You have to remember that it is a traditional form of medicine, and so a lot of that was practiced at a time when they couldn't really examine the impacts of these drugs. You know, that's not to say that it's all just hearsay. You know, there definitely are good things to come out of traditional Chinese medicine as well. I'm sure, but that's also a big driver of other illegal wildlife markets: lion bones, tiger bones,
pangolins,
pangolins.
We'll get on to that. I think I had a little like black hole searching moment of going through like loads of pangolin literature. I think I was really shocked to hear, I don't know if it was in West Africa or somewhere in Africa, so I was really shocked to hear like Chinese traditional medicine's on the rise. And I was like, what?
Really?
Like, that's the last thing you'd expect. I think, not that I know much about the Belt and Road Initiative, but that's basically the Chinese government's plan to make like the new Silk Road, right? Because China wants to be like, you know, the world power. They want to have the prestige which they had back in the day. You know, when all trade, you know, ultimately flowed through to China in the Silk Road. So they've got a land Silk Road. They've got lots of different shipping ports. They're basically building massive infrastructure projects all over the world. And I mean, it's quite nefarious in the way that they'll basically give all these big loans, and these countries can't pay them back necessarily, right? Like, but if you're like a really poor country, starved for infrastructure, and a government saying, oh, you know, we'll pay for this, you know, but if you can't pay our loan back, we'll basically take control of it for 100 years or something, which is what's happening. Like, you're still going to do it, but you basically get situations, I can't remember the exact countries, but for example, where they'll build these infrastructure projects, and there's like tension with locals where it's basically all just, you know, Chinese workers go over, build these big plants and stuff, you know, the rivers get polluted, all the local people are like, oh, you know, we can't fish in these rivers anymore, etc. This is a very big generalization, but basically I think perhaps because you're getting lots of large like immigrant populations of these workers from China, like I don't know, maybe that's shifting. You know, you're creating a market in these countries in Africa, for example, for Chinese traditional medicine. I think that's probably more it, rather than people in Africa getting convinced to try Chinese traditional medicine. But I can't rule that out. I know diddly squat about this.
Yeah.
But it was really shocking. And obviously, like, these countries, it's like Chinese pangolins are super endangered, right? And I mean, all pangolin species are really endangered, right? Because they're like, you know,
one of
the most trafficked animal on the planet.
Most trafficked animal.
You know, for their scales, which is, again, there's no basis for its efficacy in medicine.
That's so sad.
But Africa's got more pangolins than Asia does. So it'll be worrying to see what happens. And pangolin, not much. No, like, you'd think not everyone knows about pangolins being the most trafficked animal, but if they know something about pangolins, it probably is that. But even then, like, I was shocked at the extent to which we don't know about pangolins.
Right.
Like Dan Challender, who's at Oxford in the Martin School, I know you're interested in his work with the wildlife trade. He's like basically revamped or like rebooted the IUCN Pangolin specialist group, I think.
Yeah.
And he just published a book like all about pangolins. If you're interested, like, his book will be the one from like their biology through to their trade. But we know so little about pangolins. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think in general there's an awareness issue there too. Most people, I don't know about most people, but a lot of people have never heard of pangolins. You can show them a picture and they won't know what it is. Yeah. But they're so cute. They're a great animal. They look so alien, little Pokemon. Yeah. I think.
How would you describe them?
So they're like an armadillo, but with a long tail. Yeah. And they look like a really small dinosaur you know, like a stegosaurus or something. Yeah. That's what I think of, like a little baby pangolin. Yeah. But some of them live in trees, some of them live in the deserts. Yeah. They're just like these cute little, like, sort of round creatures that are covered in scales. Yeah. And they have a little snout and a tiny little nose. Yeah. And a really long tongue. Yeah.
People call them scaly anteaters, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. They're so cute. Yeah. But yeah, the most trafficked animal in the world. Very sad. They also came under fire a little bit in during COVID because they were thought to be one of the vectors of COVID-19 in the wildlife market, which I don't think was ever confirmed. No. But that was a little worrying. I thought, I mean, you never know how people are going to react to news like that. They're going to go out and kill pangolins. Yeah. That was a bit scary. Yeah, that's fair. But I think that they're okay. Yeah. But yeah, so traditional Chinese medicine is a tough one to tackle. What I was going to say earlier that I got sidetracked when I was talking about Stroop. Yeah, but they made an important point about Vietnam and that they have really, really intense air pollution. Same with China. Yeah. Just the smog is awful, and that causes higher rates of lung cancer than most other places. Wow. And so with more pollution, more cancer, more people desperate for cures for cancer, that also sort of exacerbates the issue. Not necessarily the root cause of the issue, but I thought that was a really interesting draw that they made. You know, that all of these environmental issues just kind of makes you think about how interconnected they are and how, like, we really are interdependent with nature. Yeah. So nature can inflict things upon us and we can inflict things upon nature, and it really is a give and take. And so when you're talking about solutions, you really have to be like people working with nature very diligently and respectfully and knowing what sort of impact your actions are going to have.
Yeah, that's crazy. You wouldn't expect it. Yeah, even if you clean up your air pollution, you can help fight rhino poaching.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if it's as simple as that, but it is.
Oh yeah, it's not as wow. Yeah,
I wish it was.
Just drive an electric car and we'll save rhinos.
We're there's a lot of different ways to come at it. So those are, I think, the 5. If I can recap. Yeah. So we've got rhino management, we've got anti-poaching, community engagement, trade and policy, and consumer demand, and traditional Chinese medicine. So obviously a very difficult problem. So you've got this whole system with all of these different elements sort of interacting with each other, all interdependent with each other, all independently very difficult to solve, and together even more difficult to solve. So it's a bit of an overwhelming issue to look at and go, well, this whole system is already set up. How on earth are we going to fix it? Because it obviously has not been getting better. I think that a lot of the solutions that we are working on are helping, but it's so hard to know, long term how these things are going to pan out. So all we really can do is put resources into each of those areas, and research and funding and just uplifting people and communities and the people doing the good work, because it does take lots of villages, in fact, to be able to help these issues.
Wholesome stuff. I guess the other thing, so we'll dabble our toes into trophy hunting.
Yes,
you mentioned it a few times. I think what a lot of people see, and I completely understand where they're coming from when they're like, there's an elephant population crisis and poaching, and there's a rhino poaching crisis, and then you'll see some like uber rich American, or French or British person, whatever, go and pop along to South Africa and pay a squillion quid to shoot a rhino, and people are like, what? Like, I thought we're supposed to be saving rhinos. Like, what's going on? And like, trophy hunting it's a very hot topic, and I think people have a lot of misconceptions. Everyone's coming from the right place in their heart, but would you like to touch a bit on how trophy hunting, especially work, like, I guess coming from a North American background, like hunting is the North American wildlife conservation model is based around hunting and having a hunters fund conservation through paying for tags or paying for permits or whatever it is. I think from what I've read, the Southern African wildlife conservation model is kind of similar in that sense, right? So would you like to touch on?
Sure. And I just do want to give a disclaimer, like I said, that trophy hunting is not my area of expertise, and I know it's very, very complex, complicated, multifaceted area, just as rhino poaching is, and so I will say I'm not the most knowledgeable about all the different complexities of it, and it's constantly changing, and different countries and different areas will have different policies and scenarios and situations that are right for them or wrong for them. So anything I say is not going to apply everywhere, for sure, and not going to be the opinion of everybody in the conservation world either.
Absolutely.
But
scientists
I'll
always
give my
disagree.
which is good. Disagreement fuels progress in science. In my experience, so I come from Texas, which of the North American places to hunt is like a very big one, obviously a big part of the culture there. But another thing that I think is misconstrued about hunting, I'm not a hunter, never really been into it. I love the animals, so
exactly.
Don't really
You want to see them walking around.
Right, exactly. But hunters in general care a lot about wildlife. They have a respect for wildlife for the most part. Again, that doesn't go for all hunters, but a lot of them see it as a way to interact with nature in a respectful way that kind of connects them to, I guess, ancient human instinct, like tracking down an animal and the thrill of the hunt and all of that. And at least in Texas, a lot of people, like, you get a permit, you do it correctly, you can utilize the animal afterwards. If it's a deer, you can eat it, things like that. So for trophy hunting is just sort of the next level of that. These trophy hunts can go for tens of thousands of dollars, and it's
hundreds of thousands even.
Hundreds of thousands, I think, for rhino, and possibly for lion as well, maybe probably. An elephant. So with things like that, when I was saying funding these issues is very difficult. Trophy hunting is a huge source of funding for a lot of these initiatives. So it totally depends on the area, but having $20,000, $50,000 of profit and being able to put that back into conservation, that will pay for a lot of rhino procedures, anti-poaching, community engagement, vehicles, maintenance, GPS collars, tracking, feeding, it's a very expensive operation that these lodges put on, and also just lodging is a huge one, being able to support ecotourism, and also support their communities. So it's very expensive, and trophy hunting offers a little bit of diversity in their income stream as well.
You don't want to put all your eggs in the ecotourism basket,
right?
As we've
Exactly.
discussed earlier, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So trophy hunting could be seen as a part of ecotourism, but it is different.
I guess it's
people will still come and do ecotourism or come and do trophy hunting if they're not doing ecotourism. So if that's someone's hobby and passion, they usually will come and do it.
Yeah.
And it's a bit more stable than ecotourism is. There's always a demand for it, and there's a huge demand for it.
Yeah.
And people are willing to pay. People are also willing to pay for ethical trophy hunting.
Yeah.
So major issue in the trophy hunting industry is that it's not done well. And there definitely are operations where it's not done well, where it's corrupt. They breed this animal, they basically drive the hunter up to it, they shoot it, and that's
canned hunting, they call it, right?
Exactly, canned hunting, yes. So then the hunter, operations just pocket the profit and keep doing the same thing. And when there's not really much law enforcement involved or just certification, accreditation involved, then there isn't really anything stopping them. Yeah. So you would like to leave it to the hunters to kind of pick and choose which operations they would like to go to, but it is so difficult to tell from the outside, especially as an American. You can look on their website and they can say that they're ethical, and you can say, great, book my trip. You can't really necessarily get on the ground and see how they're raising these animals and what their ecology is like. It's almost impossible to know. And their financial streams as well. Like, you really have no idea of knowing. So that's a bit easier said than done as well. So on that, I guess the morals of it come in as well, where not only can it be done in a corrupt way, people just don't like the idea of it being done at all, which you can understand. We want to save rhinos, and so seeing a killed rhino at the face of conservation for the rest of the rhinos, really counterintuitive. Like, very much why can't that trophy hunter just donate that $20,000 to see the species succeed? And you just can't really expect someone to do that, if they're not getting their cool trip and trophy out of it. So that's not what the demand is for. The demand isn't for benevolence of just donating to this cause purely. That's part of it, but that's not purely it. So you have to expect to take advantage of the demand that's out there, not just what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think was it Wednesday night you went down to so there's a really inspirational research group at Oxford. They're the reason I applied to Oxford, obviously apart from my degree, but it's the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, shortened for Wild Crew. They have this mansion that was given to them by the Blackwell's family, which are the Blackwell's is basically this big academic book publishing place. Their home is in Oxford, and they basically donated their mansion to Wild Crew to serve as their base a couple decades ago. And it's like the Stark Tower of conservation with all the Avengers and stuff. You went there on Wednesday night. They had a film screening all about trophy hunting in Namibia.
Yes.
Would you like to touch on that? What kind of things were they saying? Because we get our view of like trophy hunting, from the West, but what was the film about? What were the messages they were trying to convey?
Yeah, so the film was basically just man who has a conservation podcast called Into the Wild, if you'd like to look into it. And he went to Namibia because he was hearing all of these narratives about trophy hunting and its costs and its benefits and why we should or shouldn't do it. And it was all from Westerners. It was all from America, from the UK, from other places. And he was curious about if there were benefits of trophy hunting to local communities. Why don't we hear about that from African voices? Where are these voices? Are they there? Are they just being drowned out? Are the benefits real? Are they just people people from the UK saying, yeah, surely it has benefits. So he went to Namibia and talked to people on the ground there at a variety of different places in a variety of different roles and asked them about the role of trophy hunting for them. And almost everybody he talked to was on the same page that trophy hunting was their lifeblood of their economy. And so it actually brought wildlife back into those areas. He was mostly focusing on lions in Namibia because there's obviously another issue of human-wildlife conflict. So if the people out there are largely pastoralists or they have cattle, and they have their cattle in a kraal or a pen, and here comes a lion and it can go and chase down a zebra, hunt it, tackle it, use all that energy, or it can just hop this fence and kill a cattle that's right there. So can't blame the lion. It's going to go for the cattle 10 times out of 10. And you can't blame the farmer either for saying, I want that lion dead. It's killing my cattle, which is the way that I live and make money. It's a nuisance. It's not this beautiful species. It's
Yeah.
the pride of my country. It's a nuisance. It's a
Yeah.
pest.
Plus, it could attack me, right?
Exactly.
So,
Very dangerous to have around.
Yeah.
So, and you don't want it around your kids,
Absolutely
your
not,
family,
yeah.
your village. So, you can understand the conflict there from both sides, from the lion side and from the people side.
Yeah.
So trophy hunting has become a great solution, at least in Namibia. What I learned from the film was that the lions bringing in money for them is what's incentivizing them to keep the lions around.
Yeah.
So if it weren't for trophy hunting, there wouldn't be any sort of incentive for the people to be living in coexistence with the lions.
Yeah.
So essentially, by having the lions around, they're making a sacrifice, and they're finding ways to cope with them, with their cattle and all of that, because I'm being benefited from it in the end, you know. So at least in Namibia, everybody was saying that it was very important for them and for their economy, and that was mostly on community conservancies, which is a bit different than national parks, and so I'm not sure I could speak to Namibian national parks on that, but it was very interesting just to hear the people. They were saying there is talk of an international ban on trophy hunting, and they were saying that the people of Africa don't want it, or at least the people from the areas of Namibia that he talked to don't want that ban. Absolutely. Because they won't be able to continue with their way of life as it is. Yeah,
no, that's fair. I don't know if they've done it already, but there was talk in the UK of banning all trophy hunting imports, and I was like, no, like I've been raised a vegetarian, right?
Yeah.
Granted, I'm a flexitarian now, but I was like, no, like, just knowing these things, I was like, this is like, I understand where people are coming from. You know, they've obviously grown up watching Bambi, and nobody wants to see a dead animal, but you know, it's so much more nuanced than that. It was interesting. I didn't realize the film was about focusing on lion hunting. I thought it'd be like rhinos. There's a really amazing graph. This is what kind of like
they did touch on that as well.
Like blew my mind. I think I found it just before we recorded the podcast. I thought it was Namibia. I think it's actually South Africa, but it's a population graph of white rhinos and black rhinos, just through the decades, and they highlight the point after which like legal trophy hunting was like allowed, obviously in a controlled, regulated way, one would hope, and the populations of rhinos, it was already going up, but it was like an exponential rise after that. Like it was crazy, and I was blown away. I was like, what? Like you're telling me, like, because it incentivizes people to have rhinos on their land, and it's not what people would expect at all, right? Yeah. And obviously, well, I wouldn't want to see I wouldn't want to shoot a rhino myself. No, I'd rather it be there doing rhino things. But you know, and it obviously it's not just trophy hunting of these specific individuals, but you know, people can go and hunt a kudu, which is a big antelope, right? Whatever, you know, and they can all help.
Most people don't have a problem with trophy hunting of something like a kudu or an antelope species that's really abundant, you know. So it's just when it comes to those really big iconic species where it becomes a bit more of a moral issue. And I do understand that. I also don't like the idea of a dead animal being at the forefront of conservation for that species. But that's the reality of the situation. That's like one of the main solutions that's working in a lot of cases, like you were saying with the rhinos, the rhino population in South Africa. Yeah. So I think that also goes to show how much of a land issue it is, as well as a poaching issue, because it was about having rhinos on people's land. Yeah. But yeah, I think people do have the best interests, and so if you can capitalize on that, there was a study that showed that people were willing to pay several $1,000s more for a hunt that they knew was ethical, and also more for a hunt that they knew was giving back to local communities. Yeah. So one of the reserves near where I was in South Africa, they had a trophy hunting scheme, and I'm not sure which animals they hunted, but the people were involved on every step of the way. So they got there, they went on all these safaris. They're one of the only people staying on this whole reserve. They have the whole thing to themselves. It's a very expensive, cool experience. Yeah. And you get to go and you walk on foot, and you get like the thrill of the hunt. This is more of like the conservation hunting is what they're trying to shift it to be called, less than trophy hunting. So you hunt on foot, you go up to this animal, you find it, you kill it, sort of like the old-fashioned way. It's more about the experience than it is the trophy. Exactly. That's the shift.
It's the sportsmanship.
Exactly. Right. You're trying to shift it to a respect for the sport. Yeah. So hunt them on foot rather than like sort of unethical driving up to it. And they do choose the animals beforehand a lot of times, like which ones are viable for shooting. It depends on age, sex ratios, and all of that. And so that they go with a guide. The guide tells them this is a good animal. You can take the shot. Then they take the shot. They'll take the animal back to a community and the people actually go with them and watch them like utilize the animal actually and give it to the local people who are now benefiting from being able to eat this kudu or whatever that they just shot. So there is still quite an emphasis on how long are the horns and whatever, selling the trophy of this big elephant with this long of tusks. So there is a bit of work to do there, but you really can't knock any solution that's working. And
I don't think conservation is not in a position where you can critique a working solution like that. We can have our ideals, but people always say it's a crisis discipline, and they're like, oh no, but we're not going to do this. And I'm like, you don't have a choice, mate. Like, if you really care about the conservation outcomes, like, I
think that there is room, at least a little bit, to be a little bit critical of some solutions. You have to make sure that it's being done in a correct way.
That's very true.
But that being said, if you look into a solution and see that it's working in some areas and it's working well in a way that will allow for the long-term survival of the species, I think in that case, you're sacrificing one individual for the good of the population. And so again, it's very situational. I don't think that it's the answer in every case by
Absolutely
any means.
not,
I think
no.
there's a lot of areas where it wouldn't work. But people are getting creative. Again, we love our wildlife. Almost all people do. So it's a good fight to be fighting. The white rhinos are actually an interesting example. I didn't know this, but before I went to South Africa, but apparently in 1885 the white rhino population was down to between 20 and 50 individuals.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So southern white rhinos.
Yeah.
And so that was from hunting mostly for the rhino horn, and also for meat, and I think just for sport. So they brought them back obviously from that. So they're sort of at their not quite at a peak, but I mean
much better than
we're at,
that's crazy.
Like if we're at 18,000 now, it's much better than 20. So similar thing with black rhinos. They were down to I think like 400 or something. I think that was in the 1900s, like 1930s. But we are doing good things for these animals, and I think it is a bit unrealistic to try and restore every species to its native range, because if you think about, like, in 1885, the planet had 1 billion people. So I don't think we've reached 2 billion until well into the 1900s. So, that was a much different land area for these species. So most of it was wild or people coexisting with wildlife, and it was much sparser human populations that were there. So, you can't really expect to restore rhino species to however many tens of thousands there used to be, because there's a lot more people living here now. The best we can hope for is a solution that works for people and for wildlife. And I think in a lot of cases that's a situational and varied nature-based economy of some kind. So whether that's on ecotourism, on trophy hunting, conservation hunting, more like, and just other utilization of the land in ways that helps the land and helps the people. It's the most important.
I agree. Nice. For anyone who's interested in learning more about funding conservation, there's a good paper co-authored by Amy Dickman, who's the head of Wild Crew now, or the director. I think David McDonald's still there as well. I don't know if they're both directors. I don't know how it works, but anyways, I know she's the director now. And I think the paper's called like Conserving Africa's Wildlife Through the COVID-19 Crisis and Beyond, or something like that. But it basically, there's a great figure in it, and it basically outlays how, we basically got very few funding models at the moment, and then, if you want to be resilient in the face of, let's say in COVID-19 when ecotourism just dropped off a cliff, the different funding models you can have, and it was very interesting. And even when I went to their base on Friday the Tubney Manor, and I was just eating my couscous in the kitchen with some of the other guys like Guillaume Alvarenga, who's doing his PhD studying jaguars in Amazon, or Matt Wyers, I think it's a South Afrikaans or a Dutch surname, but he doesn't speak any Dutch. He's just English. He's from Zimbabwe. He does loads of cool lion research as well. And we were just eating I was just eating my couscous, and Amy Dickman just strolls into the kitchen for a cup of tea, and I was like starstruck.
Yeah.
Like my hands were literally shaking. I was like, oh my god, like this is literally royalty, like a world expert on lions. I was like,
yeah,
did a little bow.
She was also there at the trophy hunting screening
crazy.
the other night, and
It's mad.
she ducked out right after the film. I think she ended up coming back, but I had to leave, so I didn't get to introduce myself.
Yeah.
But she is amazing.
She's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I can't remember what
So
I was going to
knowledgeable.
go. I don't know where I was going to go.
Something about the funding.
Funding. Yeah. So she's vegetarian actually, but she's, I think her and Andy Loveridge, who also does a lot of work in Zimbabwe. Amy's core region is in Tanzania. I remember what I was going to say. So anyways, we were chatting in the kitchen, and she was saying basically like she has all these people come up to her and say like, we have so much money that people want to invest in conservation, but we don't know where to put it, like please help.
Wow.
So I think one of the things they're doing is basically trying to quantify in landscapes with like a lion carbon thing, basically a lion carbon market kind of thing.
Interesting.
Where basically like when you have trying to calculate when you have lions on landscapes and stuff, like what are the carbon benefits, and trying to quantify like relating biodiversity to a carbon market. It's something like that.
That's very interesting.
But it was really cool. But like she's a vegetarian, but she's she's like, look, like there are a lot of areas where ecotourism can't fully replace trophy hunting. So we need it. And she gets a lot of flack from other, like there's some other charities and stuff that give her flack, but ultimately I think we can't be idealistic.
Right.
I know we kind of nicely tied up trophy hunting, but there was some little more thoughts I had.
Sure.
The two critiques I get from people when they're talking about trophy hunting, the first is, like I can get hunting for food, but I can't support trophy hunting, and I'm like, what's the difference? Because if you either eat it yourself, or like in a good ethical one, you'd either give it to the community for the actual food, but the trophy itself, like let's say you're in America and you've shot a deer for food. You might want to keep the horns, or do a bit of taxidermy, and have that buck hang on your wall. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Like because you've already killed it and eaten it. So the actual trophy itself, if you're going to pay so much more money just to have that little like buck or antelope antler or rhino horn or whatever on your wall.
And the taxidermying of the trophy is also a part of the industry as well.
Exactly.
Part of the wildlife economy.
And that's what people see in museums. They're like, wow, look at this. This is cool, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and obviously that's a bit of a simplification, but that's one point.
But, that is part of the trouble of it, is that everybody is going to have their principles that aren't going to change for the most part. You can understand where people are coming from with the conservation, but if you don't agree with the morals at the end of the day, you just might not sway.
Right? And the second one is a case of implementation and corruption, where they're like, people might have these trophy hunts and it might pay loads of money, but how do we know it's actually benefiting communities? Is it just corrupt? Is it just staying in the hands of the landowners? And how do we know it's, is it just further impoverishing communities? And I think that's not a critique. I think for me, that's not an adequate critique of trophy hunting as a mechanism. It's more just a case of corruption. Like we've been learning in our classes, like, you can have all the good governance models you want, but if it's not corrupt and you can't actually implement it and effectively enforce things, like, it's just not going to work. So I think, I don't know if you mentioned it, like you've already mentioned that people would like to do ethical trophy hunting. There's no accreditation scheme as far as we know, right? Not like the Forestry Stewardship Commission for paper products and forestry, or the Marine Stewardship Council, which these things come under some flack, but they certainly do more good than harm.
Right.
One would hope.
Right.
So there's a real, if anyone wants a new project,
yeah,
there's a real need to have an ethical conservation hunting accreditation scheme, right?
Right. There definitely is. And I've tried to do some research on it, and I can find almost nothing out there. I think it is.
You sent me one paper the other day.
Yeah, that's all I can find. That one paper. So I do think that there's a lot of work to at least be researched into what that would look like and what kind of impacts it would have. I think one issue with accreditation schemes is it sort of divides because it is so expensive to get something credited. the model that they introduced in that paper was basically to put that cost onto the hunters.
Yeah.
So the hunters pay for the hunt and also pay a premium cost for it being accredited, one of those.
Yeah.
You pay a premium for it being accredited, and that goes towards the cost of accreditation. So that was their ideal model. It obviously has not been done in practice yet, and so it would be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah.
It's also tough because some people might say like, well, this one's not accredited, but it looks good, and so I think I'll still go. You know, just sort of like the transition into an accreditation scheme, I think might be difficult. Of like, there might be a time period where there are some ethical hunting schemes that just aren't certified that might see
absolutely.
a little bit
they
of
might
trouble.
fall through the cracks.
Yeah. So I think that is, and a lot also those like, community conservancies.
Yeah.
You have to think of their budgets. You know, if it costs, there's, I think it said like $100,000 to get certified, which is a lot of money.
A lot, yeah.
And obviously like a few hunts might help pay for that, it should pay for itself over time.
Yeah.
But just getting everybody to adopt that, I think, would be a really big ask. But it is a very interesting thing that I would love to look more into, just like kind of what that would look like, what sort of paths that could take, you know, get more expert opinions on it, obviously, because I said I'm not the expert here, but I think it would be cool to hear more about.
Awesome, nice. Okay, well, if you, I guess, not rapid fire questions, something like that, just to start wrapping up, how you found Oxford so far?
Oh, I've loved it.
Yeah. First time in England, right?
First time in England, yes.
Yeah. You come to the craziest. Oxford's surreal, right?
It really is.
What are your thoughts on?
It's the only place I've been in England so far. So, but I imagine this is not what the whole country's like. I got straight from the London airport onto a train here, so I haven't really even seen anything else. But it is really surreal. You know, like old buildings everywhere. No skyscrapers, like anything like that. Everything's very old, town sort of vibe. Very Hogwartsy, which fits right in with the stereotype. I really do feel like I'm at Hogwarts. It's not just the buildings; 100%. It's the vibe everywhere and the official how everything is, and everything's in Latin and has this whole magic energy about it. It's very fun. Aside from the city itself, I also just do love our program and the people in our department. At Oxford in general, in geography and in wild crew and you name it, everybody is very passionate and seems to be very willing to help students learn. They love engaging with their class. I was a bit worried that it was going to be more of from the students and the professors, just like a sort of uptight sort of like, you do your work, you're very diligent, like very intense. But it's been very, the work has been challenging, but
it's very
at
intense.
least, yes, but it is intense. But I think the people have not been intense, which I've really enjoyed. Lovely. The people have been very
shocked at how kind and lovely everyone is.
So kind, so kind and just approachable and helpful in every way. So that's been one of my favorite things about the experience, is getting to know the other people in our course and in our department. And the faculty as well. Everyone's been very great. So I've had a great time so far.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Gosh, any other bits and bobs? And I wanted to, like, I'm hoping, as well as obviously just putting this on my own podcast, media and stuff, because I want to get everyone from our cohort on, and I think there wasn't that much information. There was a bit on YouTube and stuff from our cohort when I was researching the degree, but I want to give a good taste for any prospective students, right? So, like, how have you been finding the degree so far? Yeah. And why should people apply to BCM?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Obviously, we're only partway through the degree, right? But from your initial impressions.
Yeah, 5 weeks into the degree. Yeah. I've loved it so far. I can't recommend it enough, honestly. The people are amazing. I've learned just as much from the people as I have from the professors, probably. People coming from all over the world sharing their conservation experience, different perspectives. That's one of my favorite things. But just the courses themselves and the readings that we have and the people that we get in contact with. We're getting lectured to from some of the leading people in these fields around the world, doing some brilliant research, and they take time out of their days to come and talk to us, pretty much the front runners in all of these areas. So I also, one of my favorite things about it is how interdisciplinary it is. That's why I applied to it.
I think anyone who's looking to apply, put that on your personal statement and CV. Like, if you're not interested in interdisciplinary stuff in conservation, like, That's the key word, I think.
Yeah, this is probably not the program for you. Like if
Yeah.
you were saying earlier, like you just want biology, ecology, fieldwork stuff, this is not for you.
No.
This is applied conservation.
Like there is the fieldwork. We get to go to Tenerife next term.
Yeah.
You know, and we do our biology and geography, but
yes,
there's so much more, right?
Yes, we do get with some applied ecology and stuff there, but so much of it, it's all of that, but in context of conservation and with a social science lens to it, which I love. My whole background has been science, and any social science that I've encountered has been on my own sort of interest, and so now getting to learn that professionally, like the economics of conservation and the governance and policy behind it all, and how to do it with respect to people and communities, and with a lens that we're coming from a Western culture, you know, like making sure we're doing it in a decolonialist way as well. All of that is super important, and I love that we're getting to learn about it formally, not just sort of like, oh, by the way, this is the science of it, but policy also exists.
Exactly,
be nice to people. So I've loved getting to learn about all the different aspects of it. But yeah, just the people, the courses, you're getting exposed to the best things in the world here. And,
literally like the best, like.
And the research too is like, it's almost overwhelming how the world is your oyster. You can do research on pretty much anything you want, as long as you can get somebody who can co-sign off on it. So,
you have like extreme freedom with your research project.
Which is a bit intimidating now when we're trying to choose one.
It is. What are your ideas initially?
So I obviously love the idea of the legal wildlife trade. Something that I'm always been very fascinated in, and so I would love to do some more research on that. And I know that people like Dan Challender and a lot of other people in the Oxford Martin School as well are doing work on the illegal wildlife trade, and CITES and pangolins and rhinos and you name it. So I think there is still a lot of cool work to be done there. That said, I'm not married to that by any means. So I think something within trophy hunting would be cool too, because there are people working on that pretty actively. But man, I'm still not really narrowed down on one thing in particular.
Okay, 2 more questions then. Sure. Very quick. Do you have any ideas of what you want to do after the degree? It's fine if you don't. A lot of people don't have a clue.
I think that's...
What a rough idea, or what's your dream?
That's a very tough question. Because my dream is always changing. My dream is just to be doing this work. Whatever it looks like, honestly. Be in a career that's making a difference in some cool environmental wildlife focused area. No matter where that is or what I'm doing, who I'm working with or for. So that is my way of saying I don't really know yet.
Something conservation-y.
Something conservation-y for sure. But that's part of the reason that I'm here, is that I know that Oxford opens doors in that way, and the people that we're meeting here know so many people of maybe they could give me ideas of who would be a good person to work for. I am interested in sort of like NGOs. I think that would be cool, but the more we learn about policy, I'm also getting more interested in policy and CITES and all of that. So definitely keeping an open mind. And another fun thing about conservation is that I think a lot of people don't stick with one area, you know. You can start in one thing and then kind of move around as your interests change and as your life takes you different places. So kind of exciting, but no, I'm not really sure what I want to be doing yet.
That's cool. Okay, last question.
Sure.
If you had a billboard to the world that you could put any message on it, what would you put on your billboard?
That's so hard. Anything?
Yeah, it can be goofy, it can be serious, it can be like whatever, like.
Yeah, I guess I would say be kind. I think not enough people are kind and understanding nowadays. I think we're in a time where people sort of their first instinct is to attack, be defensive. And not enough people are kind and understanding and open-minded. And I think especially in conservation that's really important when we are so like we're at the middle of these really controversial topics that don't necessarily have a right answer. And I think if you're kind and respectful of hearing other people's opinions, it's going to get you so much further than just saying, no, this is what the facts say, I'm right. So be kind. That's my message.
Cool. Thank you very much. Cool. Thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you.
There we go. I've had a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. Thank you very much.
There we have it, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
As always, Katie and I had a ton of fun recording this episode, and we're really excited to release it out into the wild for you all to listen to. It's so fascinating to get a deep dive into the world of rhino conservation and realise that there is still so much to be done. I hope this episode has inspired you to spread the word and contribute in whatever way you can to helping save rhinos. I certainly learnt a lot, and I'm sure you all have as well. Now, if you've listened to the end, you're an absolute legend. Make sure to follow this podcast on your favourite streaming platform, subscribe to my free newsletter at jamiebolam.substack.com, and follow me on Instagram at jamie.a.bolam. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.